Alright, welcome to part 2 of creating groups, and we're going to go into expression filtering for groups. So what we're going to do is actually change some stuff from the previous tutorials to incorporate expression filtering rather than using different components for each state. So I'm just going to kind of remove these for the time being, get them out of the way, and pretend these don't exist. So I'm going to actually remove this idle from the idle player and remove this from the rotating player. And instead what we're going to do is create a enum. So let's call this guy player state, and we're going to use an enum item called idle and one called rotating. Alright, so now we're going to create our expression filters. So the design of these group filters is that when you double click on it, I tend to bring it over here to the right because it wants you to input something right here. So what we're going to do is create a new condition. And there's one thing to note about the way expression filtering works is there's a much smaller subset of actions and conditions specifically built for expressing conditions at which make an entity match this group, simply because we have to subscribe to the very same properties and things that you're using with your components to make sure that this group is always valid and updates whenever something changes. So let's go ahead and connect our condition to here because it's going to be a fairly simple condition. And what we're going to do is right click, or yes, and go to create property. And let's create another property, and this is just kind of the low level way to do this. And now we can select player. Oops, we forgot to actually create a property on our player for the enum state. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. And we'll just call it state and connect that guy straight to the player state. Alright, let's go back into our idle player and do this again. So we'll select the player, and then we'll choose state. So we're going to do that for both of these. Actually, we only need one here. I don't know why I did that, sorry. And we're going to connect the player state, and we're going to make sure he has a proper enum value of, and we'll choose player state here, and then choose the value, make sure he's idle. So then we'll connect that to the B, so our expression is equal, so only when the player state is equal to idle, it's going to match as being an idle player. So let's do the same thing for rotating player. Create our condition, connect him to our rotating player. Then let's create a enum value and create a property. And select the appropriate values. Property is state. And our num is going to be player state, value equals rotating. Connect that to A and B. Alright, there we go. So now our expressions will evaluate whenever they change on anything that's a player. You can use more requires here, so you could have multiple components and do a lot more complex expressions. But for now, this will do the trick. So let's go back in our player system and go to the idle player mouse down. And we're no longer going to destroy any component. So let's go ahead and delete all this. We'll go ahead and do it for the rotating as well. Alright, so let's, what we want to actually do here is when he clicks on it, we want to set. So let's right click and do set variable. This is kind of a special node in its own way. And we're going to make our first action this set variable. So let's go ahead and go to our player and grab the state property. So we want to set the state to, let's create an enum value. Groups tutorial player state. And let's, we're going to change to the rotating state. There we go. So now I'm going to do the same thing for rotating player mouse down. Let's create set variable. Connect it. Grab our player state. And create an enum value. Use this player state. And set him back to idle. There we go. Alright, so the cool part is these component created and component destroyed handlers that we did before are still going to be invoked because it's still using the same rotating player group that we had defined before. Just a different way of doing it. So let's go ahead and save and compile all this. So when we run this, we're going to find one problem with this situation. And it's one thing to make note of whenever using expression filtering like this with two events of the same type. So we have a mouse down dispatcher on the idle player and a mouse down dispatcher on the rotating player. So whenever I click on this guy, you can see that he actually enters the state and then leaves really quick. That's because of the event-driven system. Whenever they click this, he becomes part of the rotating state. Then this one actually happens to dispatch because he is a rotating player. So when this one dispatches, he actually moves back into that. So what we're going to actually do for the sake of the example is actually right click on it and go to change event. And we're going to choose the mouse up dispatcher. So now let's go ahead and save and compile this again. So now that we changed this to the mouse up dispatcher, we need to make sure we add our mouse up dispatcher. There we go. Clear the console. Now when I click, you can see that he exited. Then we get enter, exit, enter, exit, enter, exit. This is also going to happen right from the get-go. So if we set him to idle first, now we can see the enter state and then the exit. Enter, exit, enter. Alright, that pretty much sums up this tutorial for part 2 of expression filtering.